Okay, here we go. We're gonna start. I am rolling.
One day build intro, take one.
And action.
Hey everybody, Adam Savage in my cave with a here's how old I am fact for you. When I was a kid, there were no VCRs or VHS tapes. No. They came around, I was around 12 or 13 years old when they became a product that you could purchase. Before that, there was nothing. There was television and film. After that, I have been recorded on almost every medium there is, digital and videotape, etc., except for the OG one, which is film. Okay, some background. For about 10 years, Stanley Kubrick's archival collection of film equipment was on tour around the world, and I managed to see this show in 3 different cities in 2 different countries during its run, and I became totally obsessed with his camera equipment. He owned all of his own equipment, including the lenses and the tripods and everything, and his favorite 35mm camera was this jewel invented by Arriflex in the early 60s called the 2CI. It was handheld and gave him super sensitivity with all the quality of a 35mm frame, but you can hear it. It was noisy as hell. That's the reason all your favorite spaghetti westerns were dubbed. So this has been sitting in the corner of my shop for several years just as a beautiful example of early film history when Joey Fameli said to me, dude, we should shoot a one-day build on film. And so that is what we are doing. We are shooting a one-day build, 24 frames per second, exposed onto celluloid right now.
There you have our first 35mm motion picture build video, and it probably won't be our last. First of all, I want to thank Kodak for sponsoring this project and supporting us by supplying all the film stock that we needed, as well as the lab processing over at Kodak Atlanta. They have been instrumental in making this thing happen for us. But now that the video is done, I want to take a little bit of time to talk through the journey of this, the process of getting this camera up and running, and how production and post-production went for this project. So let's start with the build itself. As you saw, Adam was building a tool for his pantograph mill. We chose a much smaller scale build because film is a finite resource and we didn't want to shoot hours and hours and hours, especially with our first project. So we chose something a bit smaller in scale. This was about an hour-and-a-half build. And I ran through about a little over under 3 rolls of the 400-foot Vision 3 Kodak stock. That is roughly about, I think we used about roughly 11 to 12 minutes, cut down to the 2.5 minutes that you saw there. Obviously, shooting with film, you have to be much more selective. You have to be, you have to shoot with much more intention than you normally would, especially with like an iPhone that we normally do. Everything in the cave was shot on the Kodak Vision 3 200T, what's called 5213 film stock. This is 35 millimeter, 400 foot rolls of film in these cans. These magazines that are on top of the Arri 2C can hold 400 feet of film. That's a little over it's like 4.5 minutes or so. This is a 200 ASA film stock. Our digital camera is a Sony FX6. I shoot that at a 12,800 ISO, very sensitive sensor, so that I can use like a variable ND to basically control my exposure. That's a luxury you do not have with film. You sort of have to find your exposure with light, essentially, lighting. And I wanted to keep this lens, I'll talk more about the lenses in detail. I wanted to keep this lens at like a f4. This goes up to f2.8, but these are vintage lenses, and vintage lenses tend to really flare or veil out when you go too wide open and light hits them. There's much less elements in these smaller lenses than we have in most more modern lenses, and so they are susceptible to big light flares. And we use the Arri turret setup here. This is like a 3-lens system, which we only had 2 lenses for, the 50 and the 85. As well as this giant ingenue 25 to 250 lens. This thing is a beast. The lens mounts on these, on the 2C, again, the 2C is a pretty old camera, and it used what was called the Arri S mount, which has this like little tab basically that locks into the turret, and there's like a little spring lock that holds the lens into place. And so these little lenses I thought were fantastic for what we were doing, especially when I was handheld. If you see, I got this camera, I look through the eyepiece, I open up the viewfinder, and I can rock my focus through these little wings on top of the lenses. That was great for the handheld stuff, but I needed something wider than the 50 at times. So that's when I'd put the ingenue on to go 25, which probably wasn't the best idea. This ingenue is a beast. It's pretty heavy. I was able to support it with this little lens support structure here, but the thing was so heavy that I was really worried that it was kind of pulling the turret down, adding some light leaks. I also wasn't really sure about the focus. It was hard to tell focus with the eyepiece that was here. I don't have like an HD video tap that some modern cameras do. I would lean on the 50 much more than any other lens because I felt that was the cleanest and sharpest, but also, you know, it limited me to my tighter frames. If you look, there's really rarely any wide shots, and the ones that I did do were a little bit softer vignetted because of the ingenue. And so this 50 ended up being the workhorse. I actually go into much more detail on these lenses and the camera prep over on our Tested Teams channel. So if you're like interested in hearing how I rigged this camera up for that build video in a longer format, go check out that Tested Teams video. I'll put the link below. That all being said, I wanted to stick at f4, did not want to go to 2.8. I think I had to go to 2.8 at some points. 200T, I had all those lights in Adam's shop, the aperture was on the grid. I was able to use my Sidus Link app, push all those to tungsten, which was the tungsten matching the film stock here, and then bring all those values up as high as humanly possible. And then I was using like a sweetener. I basically had a Fresnel tungsten light source on a light stand that I would just move around to give them a little bit of far side key in certain shots where I needed some more value. So in that way, I was able to stay at f4. There was a couple moments where you'd see I'd actually underexposed quite a bit, where there like more grain was being added to the low end areas. 200T is a very clean stock with nice fine grain, but that's if you are exposing it very correctly. And there were certain moments where I just didn't have the light levels, and I tried to push the film in some ways. But let's back up just a little bit to the first few days of loading film in here and trying it out. The very first thing was this camera has not been used in many, many years, and I was silly to think that I can just run film through it to test it out, but that's exactly what I did. I put about 60 feet of film into this magazine, and I shot a little bit in Adam's cave. And what happened was, you know, I talk a lot about the rheostat and the motor and the frame rates in the Tested Team video. Very briefly here, you basically plug power into this thing, into the back end. You turn the motor on, and then you use this little dial to adjust the frame rate, right? And so you hear a brrrr, and then it slows or speeds up by how you turn that dial. I was just getting that no matter what. Like the motor was struggling. It was having a hard time. Let me say this, the motor was working semi-okay with no film in it, but once that film was adding a little bit of drag, this motor was struggling. It was struggling hard. There was a bunch of light leaks coming from these areas where like light was getting into the seals, or the seals had been too old. And at some point, the perfs just got torn up, and this whole thing just became spaghetti inside. I just had to film coming out of this thing, and so I had to go to the camera bag and spool that film back up, send that to the lab to see how it looks while addressing the rest of the camera's mechanical issues. While that film was being developed, we got this over to Tested's own Sean Charlesworth to take a look at the camera. He has a history in repairing 16mm motion picture cameras over at NYU, and so he gave this thing a look and gave me a very detailed report of all of the issues that it had and all the maintenance that he gave it.
It looked fine on the outside, and that's the thing. A lot of times they do, and that's a trap that a lot of people fall into when buying this stuff on like eBay and stuff. It looks beautiful,
right?
But it's probably sat in somebody's basement or attic for decades, and what happens is all the lubrication turns to what I call gloob. So it usually came with a little tube of airy grease and a little bottle of sometimes a little pen that had oil in it. And there are various places inside the body here that you can oil and lube periodically.
Right.
The problem we ran into is that there are gears and the movement mechanism which are in here under this side cover, and all of that had just turned to gunk.
All the grease that was
yeah,
been there over the
it gets
years.
hard, it gets sticky, it attracts dirt. So there was like film chips in there was old grease. So like it basically ended up having to tear the whole thing down, ultrasonic clean it,
Oh, wow.
and then relube it with the proper airy grease.
So one thing that Steve Gaynor, when we were doing the ASC videos, kept saying was, he kept wanting me to crank the cameras and turn them on, saying like, these cameras, they want to be used. And I didn't know what he meant by that, but I'm guessing it's just to keep all that grease moving around.
It's like watches, like watches need to be used and moved around on your arm, like, because they're so fine and well engineered that actually using it is what keeps them going to a certain extent. Right. And yeah, like things can lock, like the glue can settle, or the glue, that's what it turns to. The grease can settle, it can get sticky and gummy, and like even with really old grease, if you run it periodically, sometimes it'll keep it pliable enough that things keep going.
Okay.
Or if you had one of these that were like kept in a damp environment and you start to get surface rust on those pieces, then it's gonna jam up, stuff like that. So yeah, it is good to run them every once in a while. This is an MOS camera like the Arriflex, and MOS cameras were made to be, at the time, light and portable.
Right.
So this is way smaller and more portable than your typical 35mm camera of the time. And so the sacrifice you make is that it doesn't have a lot of sound dampening. It doesn't have a lot of blimping on it to make it quieter. And so it's a very loud camera.
Yeah, this is a 400-foot magazine. I saw the 1,000-footers with the blimp, and it became very big, very quickly.
And now there are blimps for this you can get, and it's a massive cast aluminum with item with padding in it and dampening in it that would encase this whole thing to make it quiet for set. But this was really made for doing like Kubrick used it. That's why Adam has this.
Yeah.
Kubrick used it a lot for handheld shots because it was very easy and it was a good portable camera.
Yeah, you get this little hand
and
here.
And so the trade-off is it's very loud, and the particular motor on this is a wild motor, so you can dial in different speeds on it, but it is not, you're gonna have trouble keeping it at a consistent speed if you wanted to do sync sound with it. A great read is Robert Rodriguez, Filmmaker Without a Crew, or Rebel Without a Crew.
Rebel Without a Crew, yeah.
He famously shot El Mariachi all on an Arriflex, which is, like I said, very similar to this. This is just like 35mm, that was 16. The Arriflex is just as loud as this. So he ran into two problems. A, the camera's so loud that it was hard to record dialogue and not get the camera noise on it. And then B, what will happen is you can run these with audio in short bursts and it will stay in sync for a while.
Right.
So I think he was keeping takes under like a minute, because after that it started to drift, and we didn't have digital editing at times, so you couldn't just fudge it.
You could easily
it became a much harder, complicated problem because you're editing on a film with tape on your audio on sprocketed film stock, or sprocketed audio magnetic tape stock. So it was harder to adjust. So you can get away.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
So that was surprising to me. You just give it 16 volts and then you
just turn the knob to get it. Yeah.
That's your frame rate.
And this is interesting. So in this, you can run it from 12 to 16 volts. 16 volts, you'll get it to go a little faster. 12 volts, you'll get it to go a little slower. So if you need to do slow-mo, you want to make sure you're on 16 volts so you can go faster frames per second. if you needed to go fast motion, like really fast motion, you might want to use 12 volts so you can go slower frames per second.
Okay.
Yeah. I couldn't do all the optics, but I feel pretty good about all the mechanical stuff. Shooting film is always scary, especially 35, because it's really easy to shred your film.
I've learned that. Yeah.
It's terrifying. A lot of the times they converted these to a PL mount. So they replaced the turret with one single PL mount, which is a much more robust mounting system and much more steady. Because technically, this turret just locks in by little indents. You can kind of hear it, click into place.
Yeah.
So in theory, you could knock it out of whack. And a lot of the turrets would have locks on them to keep them in place. In this particular early version, they don't. But it's fine. It's just for what we'll do here at Tested with it, I think that it'll serve us well.
Okay.
And I think it has potential.
So let's get into the film ecosystem itself. We shot on Kodak Vision 3, which is like the predominant film stock for motion picture shooting. Whether you're shooting Super 8, 16 millimeter, 35, or even 65, Vision 3 is going to be the emulation that you're going to be using for this. Once I got this film stock, I had to sort of learn how to load it, essentially. You can't do this in light. You have to be dark. So I got a film tent and practiced on a few dummy rolls. It's essentially a black tent with my hands inside, and you're feeling for these certain markings, and you're spooling up your film that way, taking it out, throwing some tape. This is blue tape for daylight stock. It's in here right now. If I'm using tungsten, I'll put like red on there. Again, I taped up the seals here so that no light was getting through. And then I would go and shoot this all through, and then prepare the lab report, the lab order sheet for Kodak Atlanta. First of all, I specify the project, the reels, and then I can get this through a digital intermediate. So we're not getting this film back and doing like manual splicing and cutting that way. We're cutting this digitally. So we receive a digital intermediate in the form of RAW or ProRes. I chose ProRes 444. I designated a 4K resolution, and this is a 4-perf. A 35 millimeter camera, which means the gate is shooting at a 4:3 aspect ratio, which is what you're seeing here. So got all that back from Atlanta. I gave them a little hard drive. They gave me one back. I got those files and I brought them in, and I have my rolls into one ProRes files, which I would then take into my nonlinear program or DaVinci and start cutting through and coloring. Now, if you see this footage here, or if you're familiar with like logarithmic or log footage, this will look very familiar. It's like a flat, desaturated image, but all that data is in there, and this is giving you much more latitude in your tonal curves. If you watch that footage, you'd see a lot of, I kept in a lot of the burns and the changeover from the frames. I thought that stuff was kind of cool. I just leaned into this camera sort of breaking down at points. These burn transitions are things you'd pay for on Premiere, but I was able to get that in camera. So as you heard in the intro of the front of this video, this camera is loud, the motor is going, the frame rate is slightly inconsistent. You're using the rheostats to get that frame rate close to 24-ish. There is no crystal sync on this. There are crystal sync boxes that you can get made for your 2C if you want to go down that route and get this thing locked into a 24. But because of that, syncing sound is hard, and it's also loud. And so without a blimp, I couldn't really do on location sound. So there were a few options then. I could go through our music library, find some random music track and put it on and make it feel like a music video of sorts. I could take a microphone, go through Adam's shop, record the tools, the room noise, the footsteps, then try and match that into the edit here and do it myself. But like in my hands, that would be a little bit choppy, a little bit rough. But I went for the third option. That was to reach out to a sound designer, specifically Nathan Moody. Now, Nathan, I got to work with on Ariel's Antarctica Unearthed series. And what he did for that series was incredible in terms of output, but also I was really impressed by the way that he worked with Ariel, the conversations he'd have, his sort of philosophical approach to developing these scenes in terms of the sound design elements, and I wanted that for this project. And so I reached out to him, he agreed, and I gave him a silent cut of this film. And then from there, we just had lots of conversations. We talked a bunch about like mood and feelings and inspirations, and he did a great job at taking my very non-sound designy brain and then like hearing what I was saying and articulating that back to me, and then also being able to, plus those ideas, come up with new ideas, and then present them to me in ways that I can understand. And then going from there, we just had much more conversations about the abstract versus the experimental versus what kind of actuality sound design we would have. Now, this one-day build is very specific, right? It's not like a one-day build that we normally do. And so that gave us the idea to treat it more like an experiment, be experimental with the sound design. And so what he did there with the room tones and changing frequencies and then adding like little Easter egg sound elements in the background and taking tools and adding some reverberation and changing the reflections, like what he did through that whole series. Like I got to see his Pro Tools workflow, and it was pretty cool, like seeing how much care he gave to each of those sound design elements. And even more importantly, like just how great that collaboration felt in those conversations. Like I was incredibly grateful to have someone who's a professional, who can work with folks like me or other creatives, and being able to use that time and plus the material. It just felt like every single time we spoke, the material was getting plussed in a way that was really inspiring, and I'm super glad that he agreed to help me work on this project. So what now? We still have a few cans of the 400-foot 35mm Kodak 3 stock to go through. We have the Arri 2C up and running. It's running well. I'm trusting it now, but also it is a very stylistic camera. It is a B cam. It's a great music video camera. I kind of want to use something more modern, something that's being used on motion pictures that are being shot today. And it just so happens my close friend and director of photography of Mythbusters, Scott Sorensen, has an Arri 435 35mm motion picture camera to shoot with. He's got that thing kitted out with PL mount so that we can try a wide variety of lenses, both vintage and modern. And so that was a ton of fun, and I hope to shoot much more film in this coming year. So thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.